5 years ago, I married Anthony, and from the moment we met, I knew there was something truly remarkable about him. He wasn't just any man. He was a man of strength, courage, and deep conviction, a proud soldier. Anthony's life was dedicated to serving his country, and his sense of duty was unwavering. I admired his resolve, his bravery, and the way he threw himself into his work. Regardless of the personal sacrifices, he wasn't just fighting for the nation, he was fighting for all of us, for our safety and our future. Being married to him felt like both an honor and a challenge. The pride I felt in having such a strong, devoted man by my side was tempered by the knowledge that this life wasn't going to be easy. Life with Anthony wasn't the typical life I had imagined for myself. It was a life of long, lonely nights, waiting for his return after weeks or sometimes months spent away on deployments. There were times when I'd have to sleep alone in our bed, my heart heavy with the emptiness left in his absence. But I didn't mind it. Not really. I knew the importance of his work, and I loved him for it. I admired the passion with which he served, even if that meant sacrifices that included missing him during the long stretches of time when he was gone. I loved him and his dreams, and I was ready to give up my own comfort for the greater good, knowing that his was a mission bigger than the both of us. Then came another deployment. It was early in the morning, the light soft and pale as Anthony packed his bags, his face serious, focused. He moved with the precision of someone who had done this countless times before. He hugged me tightly before he left, whispering words that I would hold close to my heart. "I love you, and I'll be back soon." There was a depth to his voice that made the ache in my chest even more pronounced. I clung to that moment, to the warmth of his embrace, as if that physical closeness could somehow shield me from the loneliness I knew was coming. I told myself that I'd be fine. I could do this. I had done it before. I could handle the solitude, the long days, the quiet nights. But that morning, something changed. As I watched him walk away, a strange, unexpected feeling washed over me. I had always braced myself for his departures, but this time was different. There was an emptiness inside me that I couldn't quite explain, a hollow space that I couldn't fill. The house felt eerie, unnervingly quiet. It was as if the very walls missed him, too. Every room reminded me of his absence. I missed him terribly already, even though he had only just left. For the first few days, I tried to stick to a routine. I told myself that staying busy would help. I went to work every day, met up with friends, and tried to immerse myself in hobbies I loved: painting, reading, small tasks that normally brought me comfort. I convinced myself that keeping my mind occupied would make the time pass faster, that the ache in my heart would eventually subside. But the longer he was gone, the harder it became. As the days dragged on, the loneliness seeped deeper into my soul. Each day felt a little longer, the silence a little heavier. My friends tried to cheer me up with visits and phone calls, but once they left, the quietness returned with even greater intensity. I would sit at dinner, staring at the empty chair across from me, remembering the days when Anthony and I would talk and laugh about our day. Now, the house seemed cold and hollow, no matter how many lights I turned on. One evening, Sarah, my best friend, called and suggested I come to a gathering at her place. She knew how much I was struggling with the loneliness and thought a change of scenery might help. "Come over for a bit," she said, her voice warm and reassuring. "It'll take your mind off things." First, I hesitated. Guilt gnawed at me. How could I have fun, even for a few hours, while Anthony was out there, doing his duty, far from home? Felt almost wrong, like I was betraying him in some small way by considering a night of laughter and conversation with friends. What would he think if he knew? But the silence in my house was suffocating, and I couldn't remember the last time I truly laughed or felt alive. I needed to break free from the isolation, even if only for a short while. I wrestled with myself for a moment before I decided to go. I told myself it was okay. A few hours couldn't hurt. I deserved a distraction. I could return to my solitary routine afterward. But for now, a few hours of being around others, of feeling a sense of normalcy again, felt like it could ease the ache in my heart. So, With a sigh of relief, I got ready and headed out, hoping that tonight, for just a little while, the weight of my loneliness would lift. At Sarah's gathering, I met Rufus. He was charming, outgoing, and full of life. From the moment we started talking, I felt a spark of connection. Rufus was an excellent listener. He laughed at my jokes, asked thoughtful questions, and made me feel as if my words truly mattered. It had been so long since anyone had paid attention to me in this way, since anyone had made me feel valued and seen. For a moment, I forgot about the ache inside me, the empty space where Anthony's presence used to be. Rufus's smile, his easy charm, the way his eyes lit up when I spoke, it all made me feel special, something I hadn't felt in what seemed like forever. A wave of guilt rushed over me, and I told myself to stop. This was just friendly conversation. I couldn't let it mean anything. Anthony wasn't here, and I was allowed to have some fun, right? But the more we talked, the more I found myself drawn to him. I tried to shake the feeling, but it lingered, like a quiet whisper in the back of my mind. Rufus was easy to talk to, and I found myself looking forward to our conversations. It wasn't anything more than a fleeting connection, I told myself. Yet, the thought of him stayed with me, creeping into my mind in the quiet moments. When I was alone and missing the sound of Anthony's voice, days passed, and I couldn't stop thinking about Rufus. I knew I shouldn't feel this way, especially with Anthony so far away. But the loneliness inside me seemed to grow, and in some strange way, Rufus had filled a gap I hadn't realized existed. He had made me feel heard, noticed, appreciated, and that was something I hadn't felt in weeks. The more I tried to ignore it, the more it lingered. The guilt clawed at me, but the feeling of being seen, of being someone's focus, was addictive. I couldn't help it. I missed feeling that way, especially when the days without Anthony dragged on. Rufus and I began meeting for coffee on a regular basis, our casual rendezvous becoming a quiet escape from the everyday rush. First, I told myself it was nothing more than a harmless distraction, an opportunity to pass the time and have someone to talk to while Anthony was away. It felt comforting to have a friend, especially in those long stretches of solitude. Rufus had a way of making me feel at ease, his easygoing demeanor and infectious laugh brightening the mundane moments of my day. But beneath the surface, a part of me knew there was something more, something I wasn't ready to confront, something that made me uneasy each time I met him. As the weeks went by, the connection between us deepened. What started as a simple exchange of words over coffee soon blossomed into something more intense. Every time we met, I felt a pull, an undeniable bond that went beyond friendship. Rufus wasn't just easy to talk to. He was magnetic, presence that seemed to draw me in. The way he looked at me, the subtle glint in his eyes, the way we shared private jokes that made the world outside fade away. Every interaction left me breathless, as though I were falling into something I wasn't sure I could control. The laughter we shared was no longer just lighthearted. It carried a weight, a tension that I couldn't ignore. I told myself it was just a harmless connection, that it was just two people enjoying each other's company in a world that sometimes felt lonely. But with every meeting, that voice of reason grew quieter, drowned out by the magnetic force between us. It was a dangerous game, and I knew it. Deep down, I knew I was skating on thin ice, but the temptation was too powerful to resist. Each encounter with Rufus felt like a breath of fresh air, but it was also the air that could suffocate me if I wasn't careful. One evening, Rufus invited me to his apartment. I knew I should have said no. I knew that this was a line I shouldn't cross. I could feel the weight of the choice pressing on me, the voice in my head telling me to stay away, to walk away before it was too late. But, in that moment, I silenced it. I convinced myself I could handle it, that I had control, that I could enjoy the moment without letting things go too far. I told myself I could draw a line in the sand, but the truth was, I was already standing on the edge. When I arrived at his apartment, everything about the atmosphere felt different. The calmness, the intimacy of the space, seemed to envelop me, and suddenly, all of my doubts seemed so far away. The weight of the decision lifted, and I was left with nothing but the present moment. The temptation was no longer a whisper but a roar, and I found myself swept up in it, unable to resist. I told myself I would stop before anything happened, that I could draw the line at any moment. But the truth was, I had already crossed it. That night, everything changed. What I had feared would happen, did. I let my guard down, and in doing so, I betrayed not only my marriage but myself. I crossed a line that I could never uncross, and the moment it was over, the guilt hit me like a tidal wave. It was crushing, suffocating, a force that threatened to swallow me whole. The shame was unbearable, and all I could feel was the weight of my betrayal pressing down on me. Anthony, the man I loved more than anything, the man who trusted me with his heart, was miles away, oblivious to the devastation I had just inflicted on him. He had given me everything, and I had shattered that trust without even realizing the full extent of my actions. The realization of what I had done gnawed at me, an incessant reminder of the mistake I could never undo. I had broken him, and I hadn't even seen it coming. I felt like I was suffocating in the pain of my own choices, and every time I closed my eyes, I could feel the weight of the betrayal hanging over me. In the days that followed, I tried to distance myself from Rufus. I told him it had been a mistake, that it could never happen again. He seemed to understand, but in reality, the damage had already been done. The memory of that night haunted me, and no matter how many times I tried to push it away, it clung to me like a shadow I couldn't shake. The guilt became a constant companion, and every time Anthony called, it felt like a knife twisting in my chest. His voice, full of love and concern, made my heart ache with the knowledge that I had betrayed him. I tried to act normal, to pretend that everything was fine, but deep down, I knew I wasn't fooling him. There was a tension in my voice, a hesitation in my words, and I could hear the doubt in his tone. He didn't know what had happened, but I could tell that something felt off to him. It was in the silence between us, the subtle changes in our conversations, the way he sensed that something wasn't quite right. The weight of my secret pressed down on me every time we spoke, and I couldn't bear the thought of losing him because of my own mistakes. One day, I ran into Rufus at a cafe, and the moment our eyes met, I could feel the old pull, the temptation to fall back into the familiar rhythm of our conversations. He smiled, his voice warm and inviting, but I couldn't let myself fall back into that trap. I had to stay strong, to stay away from him, no matter how hard it was. My heart pounded in my chest as I brushed him off, my mind racing with the realization that if I didn't distance myself from him for good, I might lose everything I held dear. As Anthony's deployment neared its end, the reality of facing him again was overwhelming. The thought of standing in front of him, knowing what I had done, filled me with dread. How could I look him in the eyes, knowing that I had shattered the trust we had built together? The weight of my actions felt like a chain, dragging me down with each passing day. I couldn't go on pretending forever, but the thought of confessing the truth was terrifying. I didn't know how to face him, didn't know how to tell him what I had done without destroying everything we had worked for. I told myself I would find a way to bury the truth, to keep it hidden deep inside where it wouldn't hurt anyone. Maybe I could protect our marriage, keep him safe from the devastation I had caused. But the more I tried to bury it, the more it threatened to surface. And when Anthony finally came home, standing in front of me with open arms, I felt a surge of relief, but it was quickly followed by a rush of guilt that I couldn't shake. He wrapped me in his arms, holding me like he never wanted to let go. And for a brief moment, I felt like everything was right again. But even as I stood in his embrace, the truth weighed heavily on me. It pressed down on my chest like a suffocating weight, threatening to suffocate me with each beat of my heart. I wanted to be happy, to savor the joy of his return, but every kiss, every touch, reminded me of the secret I was keeping from him. The guilt, the shame, the fear of losing him, it all swirled inside me, and I knew I couldn't keep pretending forever. But I did. I buried the truth deep inside, telling myself it was too late to come clean now, that I had to carry the burden alone. I couldn't risk losing him, not after everything we had been through. So, I locked my feelings away, pretending everything was perfect when I knew it couldn't have been further from the truth. As the days stretched into weeks, I desperately tried to focus on repairing the fragile bond that had once defined our relationship. Yet, no matter how much I willed myself to move forward, the memories of my past actions relentlessly returned. Like dark clouds hanging over me, the guilt I carried was inescapable, gnawing at me from within. No matter how much I tried to drown it out, it felt as if every step I took toward healing was shadowed by the weight of the truth I had yet to reveal. Anthony began to notice the subtle shift in my behavior. His usual calmness was replaced by a growing sense of unease. He asked me, time and again, if I was okay, if something was troubling me. Each time, I assured him with a forced smile, masking my inner turmoil behind carefully chosen words. But the more I reassured him, the more difficult it became to maintain the facade. The lie felt heavier with every passing day, and I could sense him growing increasingly distant, sensing that something was wrong but unable to pinpoint it. Then one evening, the tension between us reached a breaking point. Anthony, his brow furrowed with concern, asked me to sit down. His demeanor was more serious than I had ever seen it, his eyes searching mine for answers I wasn't ready to give. He paused for a long moment before speaking, his voice soft but unwavering, as if each word carried the weight of his fears. I can sense you're hiding something, he said gently, his words cutting through the silence like a knife. I don't know exactly what it is, but I can feel it. It's like we're not connected the way we used to be. The impact of his words hit me harder than I could have ever imagined. It felt as though the ground beneath me had suddenly shifted, and I was left standing on the edge of an abyss. His concern was raw, sincere, and unyielding. My heart pounded in my chest, and I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. He knew something was wrong. He could feel it, this invisible barrier between us, the one I had built brick by painful brick, trying to keep my secret hidden. For a moment, I was frozen, lost for words. My mind raced, desperately searching for a way to deny what was so painfully obvious. But I knew deep down that I couldn't keep running from the truth. It was too much to bear. The thought of confessing, of exposing the lie I had been living, paralyzed me. What if it shattered everything we had? What if, in revealing the truth, I lost him for good? The fear of that outcome threatened to suffocate me. And yet, I knew the longer I remained silent, the more I risked losing him anyway. The guilt weighed heavily on my chest, a constant pressure I could barely stand. I could feel our connection slipping further away, and I didn't know how to stop it. Every moment of silence felt like a countdown to an inevitable collapse. But still, I couldn't find the courage to speak the words that could set everything right. In a desperate attempt to bridge the gap between us, I decided to speak from the heart, even if I didn't have the words to explain the full extent of what I was feeling. I've missed you so much, I said, my voice trembling ever so slightly. I've been longing to reconnect, to feel close to you again, like we used to. I miss us. My words were honest, but they were only part of the story, the part one could share without revealing everything. Even as I spoke them, I knew they didn't capture the full weight of the burden I carried. Anthony gazed at me quietly for a long moment, his eyes searching mine as if trying to read between the lines. Slowly, his expression softened, and he nodded gently. Okay, he said, his voice calm but laced with an understanding that went deeper than I could explain. That single word, simple as it was, seemed to lift a small weight from my shoulders. It was a silent acknowledgement of the truth I hadn't spoken aloud yet. It was a sign that, despite the silence between us, he still saw me, still understood the depths of my pain. In the days that followed, our marriage seemed to fall back into a familiar rhythm. We spent more time together, talking about everything and nothing, laughing at old jokes, and sharing quiet moments that reminded me of the connection we once had. Slowly, like a scar healing over time, the tension between us began to fade. We were rebuilding. Even if the road ahead was uncertain, there were still moments of awkwardness, small gaps in our conversations, but things were improving. It felt, for a time, like we were finding our way back to each other. But beneath the surface of our renewed closeness, a quiet unease lingered. No matter how much it seemed like things were returning to normal, A nagging feeling settled in the pit of my stomach. It was the secret I carried, the one I hadn't yet fully faced. It was still there, lurking in the shadows, threatening to unravel everything. The fear that, no matter how much I tried to fix things, the truth would eventually come to light, and it could destroy everything I was trying so desperately to rebuild.